inflation is at a record high, 19%. Tin of beans, the Sun has pointed out, has gone up 40% in 18 months. 40%. It's a staple part of our diet is a tin of beans. What's he going to say? What's he going to do?
Absolutely, and there's a really interesting story in The Times suggesting that on diesel particularly, customers are just being completely ripped off.
Yeah.
So obviously we would expect to see some volatility in the price of petrol and diesel given the war in Ukraine and global pressures. But what's happening seems to be far outstripping what we could expect to see because of those global factors. So diesel customers, although the wholesale price of diesel is cheaper than the wholesale price of petrol, diesel customers are being charged 9p more per litre. So what seems to be happening, basically, is that retailers, and this is happening in supermarkets as well with food, know that inflation is rising, know that the political blame is being put on the war in Ukraine, and so are ramping up their prices to give themselves higher margins, knowing that it'll be dismissed under the guise of geopolitical factors outside of their control.
Exactly. Now, the Competition and Markets Authority, that's the watchdog, is looking into all of this. And, of course, fuel prices used to be the magnet to draw people in. Asda used to do it as a loss leader. They used to lose money on the petrol sales because it was cheap, it brought people in, and they hoped that they'd spend more money in the shop.
Well, absolutely, and that is certainly not happening anymore. The Competition and Markets Authority has found that lots of supermarkets seem to have projected pretty big margins for themselves over the next couple of years, far more than they should be getting based on the figures that the CMA is looking at. So what seems to have happened, this is what the CMA is suggesting, is that one supermarket thought, hey, we can use this as an opportunity. The Prime Minister's coming out and saying, because of geopolitical factors, the price of fuel is higher. And one supermarket thought, well, that's useful. We can now put up our prices and it'll just be blamed on the war in Ukraine. And then other supermarkets seem to have followed their lead. And then the CMA isn't happy at all because it believes that those supermarkets didn't engage properly with its investigation. So finally, Rishi Sunak might be able to get a little bit of a lid on this rising inflation. He has staked his premiership on halving inflation.
Yeah.
And yet, last month, inflation, to the surprise of all economists, seemed to be going up. So maybe this at least is part of the explanation for it, supermarkets acting out.
The CMA says that fuel margins have increased across the retail market, in particular for supermarkets over the past few years. They're ripping us off.
They're ripping us off, exactly. Supermarkets were always the cheapest place to get petrol. They still are just about the cheapest place to get petrol, but that isn't, in some supermarkets, that isn't even the case anymore. And the fact that diesel users are being charged more than petrol users when diesel is lower than the wholesale price, I mean, how retailers can possibly explain that is a mystery, apart from they're just being greedy.
They're going to do the walk of shame, are they? Up Downing Street?
Well,
are you going to be heckling them?
I'm going to be back at NatCon, unfortunately.
Right, OK, yeah.
Thank you, Olivia. Right, we're still talking about this. We've got a guest now talking about the prices and how they've doubled in the last year. Consumer Group Which has found that food inflation remains at what they're calling shockingly high levels, falling just 0.1% from March to April.
Prime Minister's called, as we said, the supermarket bosses into Downing Street, and when they arrive, I'm going to call it the walk of shame. Yeah. We'll bring you the pictures. But first, we're going to speak to the editor of Farmers Weekly, Andrew Meredith. Andrew, I don't think your farmers are the ones ripping off consumers.
No, I don't think so either. You know, they've had to endure a really difficult time and they've borne the brunt of inflation, as have consumers, with the rising cost of inputs used to, produce food, get it out of the ground and into a lorry and onto a supermarket shelf. Every segment of that supply chain has seen its costs increase. And, what supermarkets are doing is trying to hold down desperately on those price rises because they're under pressure from consumers as well at the other end of the supply chain, and they're all in ferocious competition with each other. So, I don't think farmers have a particularly large amount of sympathy for supermarkets, but, they are helping the government in a way to manage the cost of living crisis. But, the fact that they aren't able to hold down on these prices more than they have done just shows the enormous amount of pressure the system is under.
Just explain, Andrew, as well about how difficult the contracts often are between the supermarkets and the farmers. So, for instance, I believe it's true that supermarkets can just change the terms of a contract. So if it's got 40 days payment, they can suddenly decide, well, we're just changing it to 120 days payment. And that's impossible for farmers to manage.
I think it's always the case in a lot of sectors where there is a big power imbalance between a buyer and a seller that you get this sort of practice happening. I speak to a lot of farmers who want to say something very cross about the supermarkets or the middlemen that sit between them, but they are very afraid to speak out because they know that if they upset that buyer, there aren't that many more around who will take their produce. So these sort of sharp practices are allowed to persist for perhaps longer than they should do, simply because people are petrified of speaking out. And that allows the heavy-handed approach to continue. And so that is why many farmers would really like to see the government extend the power of the Grocery Code Adjudicator, as well as the Competition Markets Authority, to sort of play a more interventionist role here in order to address some of that supply chain imbalance. And there's a role for DEFRA here as well, with the powers that they were granted as part of the Agriculture Act, which was passed after Brexit, as we brought back the from Brussels to Westminster and the devolved administrations, the power and the right to manage our food system in the way that we want to.
Wasn't Brexit supposed to transform life for us and with farming and agriculture? We were out of the dreaded common agricultural policy with all the subsidies. Has that happened in your view, Andrew?
What certainly happened at varying speeds, but particularly swiftly in England, is this transition from the CAP, as you say, to the Environmental Land Management Scheme. And the government is rightly very enthusiastic about a system which is going to buy environmental goods and services from farmers. And so we're going to see landowners become more overtly managing habitats for nature and for biodiversity rather than simply for food production. But in parallel with that, farmers want focus to be maintained on food security and on food production too, because they see it as a critical part of national security. And that is, I think, why they would broadly welcome this intervention by Rishi Sunak today to call the Food Summit. It's a first step to showing that perhaps they are, and the government is now taking this seriously, but this may be too little too late for the Tories. We're seeing support for the government among farmers, who should be one of their traditional power bases, fall dramatically. According to our own Farmers Weekly research, in the last 2 years, support for the Conservatives has fallen from 72% to under 50%.
Interesting. All right, thank you, Andrew. Andrew Meredith there, editor of Farmers Weekly. We're going to be talking to a farmer as well in just a little while to hear what they think.
Olivia, the conference today, Michael Gove is speaking at this conference. It's seen, this conference, as a hotbed of sedition and rebellion, and yet we've got the Levelling Up Secretary, supposed to be one of Rishi Sunak's most loyal allies. He's speaking today. He's going to attack Keir Starmer, quite rightly, over his plan to give all EU citizens the vote at the general election. Yesterday we had the Home Secretary there. Is it a hotbed of opportunism? Are they all positioning for the leadership contest, which they think is coming if the Tories lose the election?
Well, I have to say, it did feel yesterday as though Suella Braverman's speech was a pitch for the leadership. It felt a bit presumptive. It felt as though it was a pitch for the leadership once the Tories had lost the election, which, of course, they haven't yet lost. She didn't lash out and say anything against Rishi Sunak. In fact, most of her speech was pretty much rehashed from speeches that she's made before. There were big chunks of it which were exactly the same word for word as her conference speech. But what was quite interesting about it was the timing. Obviously, Rishi Sunak's in Iceland today talking about his plan to bring down illegal immigration, explaining why it's the humane thing to do is to stop the gangs of people smugglers, etc. And Suella Braverman stood up yesterday and said, well, yes, that's all very well, but the bigger problem is legal migration.
She's right.
Well, yes, I think that there are plenty of voters who will think that she is right. Because
700, it's going to be 700,000.
700,000.
Rising to 1 million.
When you remember that David Cameron, not so long ago, said that we needed to get migration into the tens of thousands, and a figure of 140,000 20,000 during the early 2010s, he said was proof that migration was out of control. Yeah. Well, we're now expecting it to go up from 504,000 last year, which was the record, to somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million. And what it seems to be is a mixture of low-paid workers coming here on skilled worker visas. Jeremy Hunt is very pro this because he wants lots of young migrants contributing to the economy. But at the moment, you can come here on a skilled worker visa if you're earning 26,000, 20% lower than the median wage. And you've got all these dependents of students, so students coming here on one-year master's visas, bringing with them sort of 5 or 6 family members. So Suella Braverman was talking about, you know, getting a lid on that, which doesn't seem to be Rishi Sunak's priority at all. So there is a bit of a split there.
And the Chancellor wants to bring in this cheap labour, but we've got 1.5 million people on the dole and 2.5 million people long-term sick. Are they really long-term sick?
Well,
are they skiving?
That was sort of the point that Suella Braverman was making a little bit more subtly, maybe, saying that...
We're not paid to be subtle on GBNews, Olivia.
He's not pitching to be PM.
No,
not yet.
I'm not. Certainly not.
We've got 5 million people, working-age people, out of work, long-term sickness, higher than it's ever been. The Spectator has been doing a fantastic data series charting this. And Suella Braverman was saying, well, we need to learn how to do things ourselves. But obviously for Jeremy Hunt, whose priority it is to make sure that the books are balanced year on year and that inflation doesn't exceed the figures that we were expecting and that GDP continues to go up, the short-term solution is obviously just to plug those gaps with low or medium-skilled migrants. So it'll be really interesting to see how that cabinet split plays out.
All right, thank you, Olivia. We have been talking about the Prime Minister's meeting with European leaders today, where he's going to urge them to unite to protect the leaky borders that we've just been discussing. Adding that to the current international migration system is broken.
Rishi Sunak is facing a vote from his own backyard with his Home Office, with the Home Secretary Suella Braverman's speech has been interpreted, as Olivia was saying, as a challenge to his position on migration, which, of course, it was. So
joining us now is GBNews' political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Good morning, Darren. What's the purpose of Rishi Sunak making this trip? There's rather a lot to deal with at the moment here, isn't there?
Yeah, there is an awful lot to deal with. The Prime Minister's got a pretty busy schedule, actually, over the next couple of days or so. As you've been talking about this morning, he's meeting those farmers and food industry chiefs in Downing Street. He's then going to nip effectively across to Iceland, as you do this afternoon for this Council of Europe meeting. I think there's a whole range of issues that Rishi Sunak clearly feels quite strongly about why he wants to be in that room. Not least of all, he wants to raise this issue of migration. Clearly one of his 5 pledges is around illegal migration, not what you guys have just been talking about, but illegal migration with the Stop the Boats across the English Channel. And this, unsurprisingly, is not a challenge that's just facing the UK. It is a challenge faced by most European countries. And effectively, there is an argument to be made that this will only be solved with a greater cooperation and a sense of how Europe as a whole could deal with migration. So he's likely to raise that. But second of all, you know, again, we come back to this issue. We saw it with President Zelensky in the UK yesterday. The Council of Europe, Russia was a member. It has been suspended since that invasion last year, and there is a real sense of wanting to show solidarity. We're expecting President Zelensky to dial in to that meeting, and also an affirmation from the current members that Russia is not only doing wrong, but is going to have to do right in the future in terms of potentially its restoration of Ukraine when this war comes to an end. But then the Prime Minister leaves that meeting today. There's not many journalists with him, and he's effectively then not really going to come back here for very long before he goes to a G7 meeting in Japan.
OK.
Instead of having this European Council meeting in Iceland, I never think about Iceland as being part of Europe.
No.
Isn't it a Nordic country?
Yes. Well,
is that for me? What?
Yeah. Why Iceland?
Why
Darren?
Iceland?
Well, because the Council of Europe is actually, it's got nothing to do with the European Union. It's a much wider body, hence why Russia was in it. But, you know, it physically, technically, is Iceland on the European continental shelf. It is part of the EEA as well. You can travel if you're an EU citizen to Iceland. Obviously, it's got long historical links to Denmark and to the other Nordic countries. In fact, it used to have very strong links to the UK and Ireland way back in the day, a very long time ago, particularly to Scotland. So, yeah, I think, on the whole, you can regard.
Yeah.
He's running
Thank you,
In the
Darren.
Eurovision sense of the word. In the Eurovision sense of the word.
Right. And Darren, he's getting a few air miles this week because he's going to Tokyo as well. Political leaders who are in political trouble often go abroad to burnish their credentials as international statesmen and women. Mrs Thatcher was in Paris when it all fell apart, of course.
Yeah, indeed, and we've often found that. I mean, I just mark on two things. I mean, first of all, I mean, the G7, he can't really afford to miss that. It's the main big international summit of the year alongside the G20. I mean, the UK's going to be one of, what, seven member states there. So he, alongside President Biden and, you know, EU leaders and Xi Jinping and others. So he will definitely need to be at that. But you're right, he is away for quite a long time. He's going to miss PMQs tomorrow. He's not back, I think, until the start of next week. In terms of the political trouble he's in, clearly there are waves and a bit of bubbles and turbulence here and there. But it is interesting that someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who, let's be honest about it, I know GBNews presenter, but someone who's very critical of this current government, also very clearly stated at the weekend now was not the time for a change of leader. I think he said it would be political suicide to do so before the next general election. So while, yes, there are difficulties home, I don't think there's any actual threat to his premiership.
OK, all right, thank you, Darren. You know, when we said this morning, we're talking about supermarkets and the bosses were going, and then it said Rishi Sunak's going to Iceland.
You thought he was going to the supermarket?
I did for a minute, I can't lie.
There'd be more votes in it if you went to Iceland in the supermarket store than going to Iceland for the European Council that nobody's ever heard of, to talk about the problems with illegal migration when we've got 750,000 people coming here legally. Prime Minister, you said you'd cut it. Get on with it.
Now, Prince Harry is set to face yet another legal battle today, this time against the Home Office over security provisions for him and his family when they're in the UK.
Our national reporter Paul Hawkins has the joy of being at the Royal Court of Justice to hear the latest from our querulous, troublesome Prince Harry. Paul, what's happening?
Yeah, morning to you both. Let's see, Prince Harry today is taking on the Home Office, it is today, and this is about his personal protections, automatic personal police protection, which in February 2020 the Home Office said it wouldn't be able to provide the same degree of protection to him and his family anymore when he enters the UK. That was about a month after he stepped back from his saying that he wasn't going to fulfil royal duties anymore. He did offer to pay for that protection, but the Home Office rejected that. He then started legal proceedings, and now we've wound up at the High Court today, where there's going to be a brief hearing to find out whether it then goes to a full hearing. Now, the hearing is being held on the grounds that he feels Prince Harry should have been told about the policy before that decision was reached by the Home Office, and that he should have been allowed to make representations to the Home Office in relation to that decision. So we're going to have a brief, short hearing today, and the judge will decide whether it then goes to a full hearing. Meanwhile, in another part of the Royal Courts of Justice, he's fighting Mirror Group newspapers over allegations of phone hacking.
Paul, this is really all about guns, isn't it? Isn't this about the fact that if Harry has the royal protection, they can carry guns? And if he has his own protection, of course, they can't. But if he says, well, I will pay for them to carry guns, then that opens the door for any leader from any country or anybody in a position of power to come over here and say, well, I'm going to pay to have protection with guns as well. Have I misunderstood that?
I'm no expert on the matter either, but that would be the logic, I guess. Listen, the Home Office said that we are not guns for hire. That's the phrase they used. So they rejected that offer outright. And then that's now led to Harry seeking this judicial review. We'll find out what the judge has to say later, and then whether it will go to a full hearing or not.
Okay, of course, Paul, at the coronation, Paul, which Harry was at, albeit very briefly, he would have been covered by royal protection officers because he was there as a member of the royal family, and they would be armed.
Yeah, that would have happened at the coronation. But listen, the Home Office has come to this decision a month after he decided to step back from day-to-day royal duties, not merely just attending those kind of huge one-off royal events. So that decision by the Home Office, that'll be scrutinised by the judge, one would imagine, later, and then we'll find out whether it's going to go to a full judicial review.
OK, thank you, Paul.
Of course, when Trump comes here, any Prime Minister comes here from abroad, they have got their armed protection officers because they're public figures doing public duty. Harry's no longer a public figure. His choice.
It is fascinating. I know it might seem a bit dry, that court case, but effectively, Harry brought this action for judicial review when Queen Elizabeth was still alive. So he was taking his granny to court, effectively, and now he's taken his Dad to court?
Well, of course, they would say it's a matter for the Home Office. But, of course, if the King intervened to
Who's
say
the
to
boss?
the Home Secretary, I really do want my son to have protection.
Yeah.
But he's made his choice. As the Queen said to him, my dear Harry, you can't be half in and half out. You're royal or you're not. No sympathy at all, Harry. Sorry. Stay in America, will you? Do us all a favour.
Right, still to come. We're going to be looking into the growing food prices and what the Prime Minister is doing to fix it. This is The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's going to be a dry day ahead with high pressure in charge. We could see a few showers, largely across the north and the east of the UK. And feeling quite warm in the sunshine. High pressure dominating as we move through this week, though it does move away at times and allows weak weather fronts to topple over, giving some patchy rain, largely across the far north of the UK. Many of us fine and dry, and temperatures rising as the week goes on too. After a chilly start this morning, we've got plenty of sunshine to come. However, as we move towards the afternoon, the cloud will bubble up, so a bit more in the way of grey skies for the afternoon, but there should still be some sunny spells. The risk of a few showers, largely across parts of Scotland, perhaps Northern Ireland, and then later across eastern parts of England. One or two of these could be heavy at times, but most places staying dry, and in the sunshine, temperatures reaching the mid to high teens, 18, 19 degrees as a maximum temperature. Into the evening time, we could still see a few showers across southern Scotland, northeast England, just moving their way southwards, but they tend to fizzle out, and then skies generally clear for most of us. Perhaps one or two mist and fog patches where skies fall light, and again quite a chilly night to come under the clearest skies, falling to mid to low single figures in the countryside. Towns and cities holding up. Perhaps just thicker cloud moving into the far north to start Wednesday morning as this next weather system starts to move in from the Atlantic. But for many, another fine day with that high pressure in charge, plenty of sunny spells. Just notice though, into the afternoon, perhaps some eastern areas just catching the odd sharp shower, but again most places will avoid these, and that rain just making steady progress eastwards across central and northern Scotland. So quite chilly here, but again in the sunshine not feeling too bad, the high teens. Over the next few days it stays largely dry, some rain at times perhaps for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and those temperatures gradually rising and less chilly at night time too, temperatures into the low 20s by the end of the week.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's Tuesday the 16th of May, it's 10 a.m. This is To The Point on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Food price crisis. Sunak finally, he's summoning the supermarket bosses to Downing Street, and you know the cost of living crisis is causing food bills to soar.
Yeah, an analysis by the Sun newspaper has revealed that a can of baked beans has gone up nearly 40%. How are you coping with the cost of the supermarket shop? Get in touch via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
And Michael Gove, he's on the warpath. Good. He's making a speech later today to take Labour leader Keir Starmer to task for proposing to give all EU citizens living in Britain a vote at the general election.
And the tax man cometh. Nurses are now among those caught in the 40p tax band originally intended for the rich. All of that to come. On To The Point. Get in touch this morning on email to us, gbviews@gbnews.uk as always. But first of all, here's the news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom at 1 minute past 10. The Prime Minister will tell European leaders the world's most vulnerable are paying the price for unlawful migration. Addressing the Council of Europe in Iceland this afternoon, he'll say the international system for policing human trafficking isn't working and that the UK isn't the only country being affected. That's as the government tries to implement the illegal migration bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords. The new law aims to tackle small boat crossings, sending asylum seekers back home or to a third country, such as Rwanda. Well, ahead of his trip to Iceland, the Prime Minister is currently addressing the Farm to Fork Summit. He's promising farmers a fairer price for their produce and pledging to get more of their products on supermarket shelves. The latest figures show meat, yoghurt and vegetables are just some of the supermarket items that have doubled in price compared to a year ago. Consumer group Which has found food inflation remains at what it says are shockingly high levels. For example, the price of a pack of sausages has risen almost 95% on a year ago, from £1.25 to £2.42. 1 in 5 taxpayers could be paying higher rate income tax by 2027. Think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, says millions of middle earners, including some teachers, nurses and electricians, can expect to be paying 40% or more. Describing it as a seismic shift to the system, the IFS says the 6-year freeze to allowances and thresholds could become the single biggest tax-raising measure since 1979. Meanwhile, jobless figures have unexpectedly risen again. Unemployment rose to 3.9% in the first 3 months of the year, up from 3.8% in the previous quarter. Data from the Office for National Statistics also shows vacancies have fallen to the lowest level for 18 months, with the number of people in work slightly higher. Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth says the government needs to invest in training and reskilling.
I would argue that we need action now to help people who are trapped on benefits
to move into work. It's why we've offered an into-work guarantee reform to a particular aspect of the benefit system. But we've also got to offer people proper training and help and reskilling to move into good, well-paid jobs, because a job should be able to provide for yourself, for your family, for you to build a home life. And too many jobs in the country are low paid at the moment.
Well, Vodafone has revealed plans to cut 11,000 jobs over the next 3 years. The group's new chief executive says the mobile phone giant must change to address poor performance, and the cull is part of plans to simplify the business. The job cuts will impact the UK's headquarters at Berkshire and worldwide. It comes amid a 1.3% drop in earnings to a lower than expected £12.8 billion. And forecast little or no growth over this financial year. West Yorkshire police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder after 2 people were found dead at a house in Huddersfield. Officers were called to an address in Harp Inge yesterday morning after paramedics found a man and a woman with multiple injuries. They died at the scene. The street was still cordoned off this morning with 5 police cars still at the scene. The suspect remains in police custody for questioning. The head of the Royal College of Nursing is expected to urge the Prime Minister to enter negotiations to end strike action. In a speech at the union's annual conference, Pat Cullen will tell members of the government will be forced to act if nurses vote in favour of further industrial action. A postal ballot on new strikes will open next week. It's after the RCN turned down a pay offer of between 10.3% and 10.7% over 2 years, which the Prime Minister's spokesperson says is a fair and generous offer. Ukraine's forces have shot down 18 Russian missiles overnight in a concentrated attack on the capital. Officials say drones, cruise and ballistic missiles were fired at Kyiv, describing it as an exceptionally intense air bombardment which saw flashes and explosions across the skyline. It's the latest in a number of attacks targeting the capital this month. Up to 1 in 7 bus services across England could be cut if government funding isn't extended. The deal to keep services running expires at the end of June, and operators planning to cancel or change routes are required to give 6 weeks' notice, with pressure for a new agreement to be secured by Friday. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, everybody knows that a trip to the supermarket now is hugely expensive, massive food inflation of around 20%. The Sun has been looking at food prices across the board, a can of baked beans, for example, up 40%.
So how are UK farmers faring with this? Let's talk to Welsh farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones now. Good morning, Gareth.
Bore da.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you. You've been raising the alarm about this issue for many, many months on GB News now. Is there any cause for optimism from your point of view?
Yeah, you know, the conversation started, that's really important. But they should be discussing in government as well about procuring everything British for the army, for the hospitals, for jails, for schools. Everything should be procured from the British farms, and that would add to the economy and boost, you know, the farmers' income as well, because we're in a heck of a state and we need to be pushing British agriculture to feed our nation in a sustainable and affordable and regenerative way.
That would be a straightforward thing, Gareth, but of course the government will say we've got to go where it's cheapest. And sometimes, of course, regrettably, it's cheaper to import lamb from New Zealand than perhaps to buy it from Wales.
Cheap food comes at a cost, Andrew. That's the truth. It'll come at a cost to the environment, it'll come at a cost to the animal, and it'll come at a cost to the farmer. If we're not backing British agriculture, what are we going to back? You know, let's build a better Britain on our bellies. We need a farming food revolution in this country. I've been telling you, we've been sleepwalking into food shortages for a long time. And, you know, when the shelves are empty, we can see what the cost is now. There wasn't tomatoes, there wasn't peppers. A lot of these government policies are trying to cut down on livestock. It's absolutely bonkers what they're doing. we have to get behind, you know, environmental schemes, don't get me wrong, but animals, livestock are part of that, and we have to educate the next generation in eating healthy and making sure they understand that local, seasonal food is the best.
Gareth, just explain to us what the impact of this environmental land management scheme is on farmers.
Sorry, I've just got a lorry coming in behind me. Can you say that again?
Don't worry, you're having to work very hard. I know that. 2 jobs at the same time here. This concept of environmental land management and what that means. Just explain to us what that means.
Well, it's slightly different in Wales because we haven't had our policy yet. But look, we're all the same. We've got to be producing food in an environment and sustainable and affordable way. It's not easy. My family's been working the same land for 375 years, and anytime you want to come up, I'll take you. I'll show you around what we do up on our farms, you know. It's regenerative. We use the manure, we use the wool to grow our own food, and it's something that we should be pushing on to the next generation. It's not going to be easy. A couple of months ago, I was down in Cornwall on a farm there, and Bannerman Project it's called, where they've taken the slurry from the slurry pit and they're turning it into methane gas. And I drove a tractor on that methane gas. It's amazing. That farm's nearly off grid now, so it's milking the cows off the methane that's coming off the cow poo. You know, these things are things we can do. We've got technology to grow our veg, we've got technology to grow our salads. Let's get back behind British agriculture, hydroponics, and there's so many different things we can do, but we have to have government support, and we have to have, this is the most important thing I can tell you, is we have to have the support of our consumers and customers, and the supermarkets have got to wake up and smell the coffee, because once the farmers have left the land, they're gone forever. So just be careful, because once we start lowering our production, we could be in a lot of trouble.
Gareth, would it be helpful if supermarkets actually, which is where most people buy their food, had logos, stickers saying British produce, so consumers can then make that choice?
I totally agree with you there, Andrew. And, you know, I've been saying for a long time we should have some kind of traffic light system, so everything in the UK would be green, you know, and then in Europe maybe amber, and the rest of the world maybe red. You know, that's a simple way that the housewife or whoever goes shopping can see where their food is coming from, because there's a lot of misleading advertisement and misleading labelling, and it's not right, because we're working hard to produce top quality products which then go against on the shelf at half the price for something that's inferior, and that's not sustainable. And another thing I'd like to say as well is the waste in this country. 1/3 of the food we're producing is going to waste. We have to address that, you know. We have to look at that, because it's not good for the environment, it's not good for our carbon footprint. We have to all work together to be producing food and making sure it's affordable and everybody's getting fed in this country.
The supermarkets are being called in today by the Prime Minister, and there'll be a conversation and the Prime Minister will say he's read the Riot Act to them. But are they supermarkets, Gareth, paying you farmers a fair price?
No, not on a lot of things. Just look at the profits they're going. Their profits are going through the sky on every single one of these supermarkets. They don't care. They're ruthless. They'll tie you to the ground.
Yeah.
They're only there for the money. They want that for the hedge funds, and you know, their fat cats are sitting in Barbados on sun lounges drinking pina coladas when the farmer's got to go out and do 2 for the price of 1. It's not on. It has to be addressed, and we have to start getting the British public behind us, and we start, you know, making sure they understand how important the farmer is. You know, you're going to need a solicitor maybe once or twice a year, dentist once or twice a year, but you're going to need a farmer every single day of your life while you're on this earth. They're the
Gareth,
people that are feeding you.
Why do you think the big supermarket chains feel emboldened to behave in that way? Is it because if they reduce their profits via British farmers, they can just go overseas and they can buy the blueberries from Morocco and the strawberries from Egypt? Is that the issue?
Yeah, and, you know, if you look at the Almira, you know, those slave labour there, there's all types of ways they're producing food, and it's not a good way. we need to be looking at seasonal food in this country as well, and eating seasonal. If you go back 50 years, half of these things wouldn't be on our shelves. I believe we've got too much choices as well. You know, we need to be fed, but when there's food that's been thrown in the bin and not being used, well, that's a total waste, and, you know, it's a bit disrespectful to the farmer as well. But the supermarket will always chase the money. But the supermarket needs the customer and consumer. So if they are going into these supermarkets and asking for British products and asking for a fair price, you know, a fair price for the farmer, well, that's when the supermarket might prick up their ears and listen to the consumer, because they are the ones that are going and buying the items. And if they get the support for us, we can then add value to the products. We can go, and, you know, our business can thrive then, and hopefully we can produce more food, which is more affordable.
You've been farming this land for 350 years, your family, Gareth. Do you think this is arguably the toughest time for your family?
375, I don't want to lose 25
Sorry,
here.
375.
Yeah, you know, listen, it's been difficult all my life in agriculture, I'm not going to lie. You know, it's the elements. 2013, we were hit by a massive snowstorm. But government and supermarkets are the biggest problem at the moment, and environmentalists as well, you know, trying to screw down farmers and trying to, you know, rewild everywhere and take away our land for solar. And I'm not against solar, and I'm not against the right tree in the right place. And we've got plenty of industrial units where we can put solar panels on. Let's watch after the land we've got, because they're not making any more of it. And that's the main thing we've got to produce our food. Let's never forget it. So hopefully my kids and the rest of my generation will get another 375 years on this beautiful
We hope
landscape.
so too.
I hope so. Thank you, Gareth. Gareth Wyn-Jones there. Thank you.
What a nice man.
He's brilliant, isn't he?
Yeah,
Just
good
feels
luck.
so passionately about it.
Yeah.
See, when Rishi Sunak got the supermarket bosses in Downing Street, I want Gareth there as well.
Yeah.
I want these people who are living at the coalface of this to have these
So
conversations.
look the supermarket bosses in the eyes and say, how come you're making so much profit and we're not?
Yeah. Anyway, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. It was interesting as well, saying we all have personal responsibility to buy British when we can. I do try. I really, really do
And
try.
I also support my local greengrocer to get my
Yes.
vegetables and fruit as opposed to the supermarket.
Me too. Twickenham High Street, excellent greengrocer. Still
There we
takes
are.
cash as well. He likes you. I don't know if he takes cheques.
I take cash, he takes cash, and he's always thrilled. It's you, Andrew, cash, great.
Now, this week sees the return of Operation Sceptre, a nationwide week of action against knife crime undertaken by all 43 police forces in England and Wales.
This is about delivering strong results, preventing young people from becoming involved in violent crime in the first place.
Right, let's talk to Patrick Green now, CEO of the Ben Kinsella Trust. Good morning, Patrick. This must be a conversation you hoped you wouldn't have to keep having by now, and yet the situation only seems to be getting worse. 150 teenagers have lost their life in London under Sadiq Khan's mayoral period in office in the last 7 years. Your response to that?
Well, it is a conversation we hoped we'd never have 15 years ago when we lost Ben. The situation has got worse. Knife crime is up 46% across the country over the last 10 years. You know, maybe 15 years ago, we would have thought knife crime was a preserve of big cities. But what we see now is it is spreading to small provincial towns. We're seeing, you know, rises in knife crime right across the country. 40 of the 42 police forces in the last 10 years are showing an increase in knife crime. So it's something that's, you know, it's probably the most pressing issue that's facing this country today.
How do you persuade, Patrick, young men, particularly I appreciate what you say, it's spread beyond our inner cities, but how do you persuade young men in gangs it's not cool to carry a knife?
Well, that's clearly not an easy conversation to have. But what we find is using people with lived experience is obviously a good way of reaching young people, people who've from that locality who've been in the same position, sometimes made poor choices, recognise they've made poor choices, and then have come along to work with other young people to try and move them away and not make the mistakes that they made. You know, Knife Crime Awareness Week this week is a really important week. You know, we talk about Operation Sceptre. You know, the police carry a huge burden in tackling this issue. Predominantly it is a law and order issue, but there's a role for everybody to play here. You mentioned in the previous piece about, everybody playing their part by buying British in terms of preserving British farming, but also in terms of tackling knife crime. We all have a responsibility to talk to the young people in our care about this issue. And, we can be inspiring and we can have those difficult conversations and help young people in our care make better decisions to stay safe. And that's where this starts. Sorry.
No, Patrick, I was going to say, we read sometimes about young men being murdered with machetes. Where on earth are they buying machetes, and why are they? I'm not one for restricting people's rights, but why are machetes easily available on sale?
Well, I can't answer why they're so easily available on sale. I've been campaigning for quite some time to restrict their sale. Not only are they easy to purchase, they're cheap. You can buy a zombie knife or machete for probably £20 or £30. Nice. You could, with a couple of clicks on the internet, you can buy one of these grotesque knives and have them delivered to your door the next day. The government have gone out to consultation to ban these weapons. We are fully supportive of that. I just fear that the process is going to take too long to get through Parliament.
Yeah, Patrick, why do we need a consultation? It's horrible. They're not necessary. They are being used by young men to kill each other. Just ban them.
If we could, I would absolutely be delighted to do that. Unfortunately, the processes we have to go through are sometimes long and extended. Look at the online harms bill. We're all concerned about what young people see online. And yet, what are we, 4 or 5 years? That bill has been inching its way through Parliament. It's one of the big frustrations I have. We don't need a machete in the inner city. You don't need, and in fact, I'm thinking in farming, there are plenty of other tools you can use to do those jobs these days. I can see no reason why in this country you need to buy a machete.
No, absolutely. It just seems extraordinary, doesn't it? Do you think also, Patrick, one of the problems, because I've got a teenage son and I live in London, and this is a source of concern for me, but one of the problems, what he reports to me, is that when there's petty crime amongst young lads on the streets with not enough to do, when they're nicking bikes, when they're nicking mobile phones off each other, he says the police aren't interested. And those petty crimes amongst young men easily escalate to knife crime if the police aren't involved in these other incidents.
That's a really good point. From the work that we do, we're working with 5,000 young people every year. Young people who say they don't feel safe where they live or where they go to school are 3 times more likely to think that a knife will protect them. Oh. And we often hear about fear being a driver for carrying knives. It is. And if we can address that, and this is something we can all do about making sure that young people are safe, going to school, where they live, where they play. It's hugely important, because if they don't, they sometimes make the poor decision to think that a knife will protect them, and of course it doesn't.
And of course, stop and search, Patrick, is a very contentious area. Certain community leaders think there's too much stop and search, others say there's not enough. But if there is more stop and search, that could perhaps catch these boys with knives and blades.
Yeah, stop and search is obviously an important police tactic in terms of tackling knife crime. However, stop and search is often portrayed as a silver bullet in terms of tackling knife crime, and it's not. It plays a part, but it isn't the ultimate answer to this. We've got to look deep into the drivers of knife crime, deep into why young people think carrying a knife is important in the first place, because often by the time they're carrying a knife, they're not deterred by being caught by the law. So the law doesn't act as a strong deterrent here. I think it's far more important that we get lessons in earlier and change young people's views on this at a much earlier stage.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Patrick Green there, CEO of the Ben Kinsella Trust. Very happy to give him time to talk. It's such an important issue.
And this should be a massive issue when Sadiq Khan comes up for re-election next May as London Mayor for his 3rd term. Do we really want a mayor to run for a 3rd term? No, particularly him. But 150 teenagers dead. The majority of them, Bev, young black men.
Yeah, victims and perpetrators. It is a a problem, and it just is ignored. Like I say, when my son comes home, Neil's, and he said the other day about a mate of his who nearly had his bike stolen, and he managed to cycle away, but my son and his friend were there, and these guys were saying, we're going to wet you. So in other words, we're going to stab you. It's just the language is just awful. And luckily they were near a pub, and there was some guys there. They just sort of went, stood with the people in the pub, and these absolute scallies ran away. Of course, they're wearing masks, and that's part of the problem as well. We've normalised mask wearing so that when these kids on the streets pull up a mask, it no longer looks scary anymore, does it? We've got used to it.
So that would be an issue that will be ongoing. Now, still to come, nurses and teachers are among nearly 8 million people who are being dragged into a 40p tax ban. When it was introduced, it was meant for the rich. What's the government doing about it? Well, they're causing it. Find out all about this on To The Point on GB News with Andrew and Bev.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. We're just critiquing Liam Halligan's shirt and tie combination. We're going to get to that in a moment.
Yeah, we are. It's 10:27 now. The rate of unemployment in the UK has risen to 3.9% in the last 3 months, up from 3.8%. It's a slight increase, but.
That's right. Data from the Office of National Statistics shows vacancies have fallen to the lowest level for 18 months, with the number of people in work slightly higher. So, the man in the tie. I didn't have a particularly strong opinion on your shirt and tie combination. Andrew Pearce had a much stronger opinion on it.
You need a darker tie with
It's a coping strategy.
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
I like my tie.
I think you look lovely.
It's a nice tie, but I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Very important. Unemployment figures. How can they have gone up?
So there's lots of data out today. Let's just quickly do the wage data first, what people are actually paid. This has just come out from the Office for National Statistics, and I've put it here in a graphic. Private sector pay, so 4/5 of us work in the private sector. That's up 7%. That's between January and March compared to January to March 2022. Public sector pay, 5.6% up, but inflation in March was, of course, 10.1%. So that means what we call real wages after inflation, they're still falling. Having said that, let's say inflation goes down to about 8.5%, which I think it will in April, 8.5 to 9% when the number comes out this week, next week. And real wages start to stabilise again. And then the other numbers that are out this morning, as you mentioned, unemployment, let's have a look at those. We learnt that in February, 332,000 days were lost to strikes. In March, that was up to 556,000. So lots of strike action. In fact, in January, it was about 800,000. That's when most of the strikes were. So lots of strike action going on. Unemployment is up from 3.7 to 3.9%. Nothing like the 10% when we were kids, Andrew.
Yeah, quite.
But still, it is higher than it was. But look at this. Long-term sick now, 2.55 million people of working age. That's getting on for 1 in 8 of the workforce.
What's wrong with them?
The ONS said this morning it's partly mental health issues, it's partly back and neck issues, which some study has linked to more working from home.
Right.
Whatever. It's also, of course, respiratory conditions and, quotes, long COVID.
And are some people, as my father would say, late father would say, are some people swinging the lead?
Well, I don't know. Certainly there's been a very strong uptick in the number of long-term sick, and then there are people that are paid by their employers or paid by the state in order to not work. And inactivity is a big issue why we've got a low productivity in this country.
And you've got 1.5 million people claiming unemployment benefits as well. That's 4 million people doing nothing.
Well, it's 4 million people. Some people would say that they should be supported by the state. Other people would say that at least some of them are, to use your dad's phrase, shirking.
Yeah, I would say make them pick the fruit out of the ground if they're getting these benefits. Why not? Why do they get it for nothing? Well,
yeah, you know what? I'm probably somewhere, but yeah, but I don't have quite the same strong opinion as you, Andrew, on it, but there's definitely... What happened during lockdowns? We reset many people's lives. We forced people to stay at home. Well, guess what? Surprise, surprise, some of them never, ever want to come out again. Now, some of that is genuine. They are depressed. They no longer, have the same job that they did. They lost their jobs during the pandemic. They don't know how to get back on the work ladder. I'm not making excuses because there's no doubt there are some people who are...
Look, lockdown was traumatic. What we're experiencing now is a cost of lockdown crisis, not so much a cost of living crisis. A lot of this inflation is supply chain issues, massive money printing linked to lockdown. And, of course, that inflation combines with the fact that a lot of people have lost their mojo, there's a lot of fear. But there are also some people shirking. But let's just think about this inflation because, of course, since we spent all that money during lockdown, the state is desperately trying to raise money. That's why the tax burden's at a 70-year high. And we've got a real jaw-dropping report today from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. They are saying now that because so-called tax thresholds have been extended, so where you start paying income tax is about 12.5 grand, where you start paying the high rate of income tax is just over 50 grand, we're going to get to a point, because those thresholds have been extended into the future,
frozen for 4
even
years.
Though wages are going up, they've been frozen to 2027, 2028 by a combination of then Chancellor Rishi Sunak and now Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. It means that a fifth of all taxpayers by 2027, 2028 are going to be paying tax at the higher rate. We are talking not particularly well-off teachers, not particularly well-off nurses, not particularly well-off lower and middle managers. People working really, really hard and doing loads of overtime in the service sector, waitressing, working in kitchens and so on. These people should not be paying tax at 40%, but they will be paying tax at 40%. And for me, an opinion here, this is anti-aspiration.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of Conservative backbenchers are going to have serious issues with this report.
And they should, because it's a disgrace.
Yeah, and that aspiration is what we're talking about with the 2.5 million people, some of whom will be genuinely sick, and some of them have just lost their will to work, because they look and they go, what's the point?
Yeah, because
What's
the Chancellor's going to take 40% in tax, then there's the national insurance on top.
That's right, which is just tax in another name.
way.
Yeah.
Look, this cost of living squeeze, prices are going up. Finally, I've been saying here on GB News for a month, why isn't the Prime Minister getting the supermarket bosses to do the perp walk up Downing Street? He can call it a fork and to food summit if he wants.
We're going to call it the Walker Show.
But basically, it's the Prime Minister putting an eyebrow in the direction of the supermarket bosses, that's right. So people's food bills are going up. People's energy bills are still sky high, even though wholesale energy prices have come down. Filling up the car or the van is still extremely expensive, even though oil prices have come down. And now, on top of all of that, if you do work really hard to get a bit of extra money for yourself and your family, then you're going to be taxed at 40% over 50 grand as wages are going up.
And that used to be called the higher tax rate.
That's right. It was meant for wealthy people. And now it's being increasingly seen as a tax. Well, it is a tax for ordinary people without flash jobs, who it's all about their labour rather than, using their flashy degrees.
Paying that tax and feeling like we're not getting any public services for it.
And if you're putting diesel in your car from a supermarket, they're fleecing you.
Yeah.
The Competition Markets Authority says so today.
Right. Thank you, Liam. Sorry it was so brief. Now, still to come, the RCN will use a speech today, the leader, to urge the Prime Minister to negotiate a pay deal with nurses. But how far can the government go? We'll find out after the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Beth, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:34. The Prime Minister will tell European leaders the world's most vulnerable are paying the price for unlawful migration. Addressing the Council of Europe in Iceland this afternoon, he'll say the international system for policing human trafficking isn't working and that the UK isn't the only country being affected. That's as the government tries to implement the illegal migration bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords. Ahead of his trip to Iceland, the Prime Minister is addressing the Farm to Fork Summit. He's promising farmers a fairer price for their produce and pledging to get more of their products on supermarket shelves. The latest figures show meat, yoghurt and vegetables are just some of the items that have doubled in price compared to a year ago. Consumer group Which found food inflation remains at what it says are shockingly high levels. 1 in 5 taxpayers could be paying higher rate income tax by 2027. Think tank the Institute for Fiscal Studies says millions of middle earners, including some teachers, nurses and electricians, can expect to be paying 40% or more, describing it as a seismic shift to the system. The IFS says the 6-year freeze to allowances and thresholds could become the single biggest tax-raising measure since 1979. Meanwhile, jobless figures have unexpectedly risen again. Unemployment rose to 3.9% in the first 3 months of the year, up from 3.8% in the previous quarter. Data from the Office for National Statistics also shows vacancies have fallen to the lowest level for 18 months. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2540 and €1.1503. The price of gold is £1,602.67 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,790 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:40. This is The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. You have been getting in touch all morning. Thank you. We've had a very busy inbox. Judah said politicians of all parties seem to be quick enough to interfere in the banking and energy industries with things like windfall taxes. Why aren't they doing the same with supermarkets?
And Martin Manchester says it's time the government pushed British farm produce in our shops. That was the point I was making with our lovely Welsh farmer. Why don't we have buy British on the labels? We're constantly being told we shouldn't consume non-seasonal fruit and vegetables because it's not good for the planet. But most importantly, it supports our British farmers. I'd always pay a bit more for homegrown produce.
Yeah, well, Joe in Peterborough says if it was just price rises, that's one thing, but the items are shrinking, so you're getting even less for high cost. I've noticed that, Joe.
And Robert makes the point, Andrew, you said, bear in mind, some supermarkets have their own farms. They can control the prices.
Didn't know that.
Good point.
Right, keep your views coming this morning, GB Views at gbnews.uk.
Now, the head of the Royal College of Nursing is going to use a speech today to say the Prime Minister's finished the job and negotiate a pay deal. She wants double-figure pay rise.
This comes exactly a week ahead of a new strike ballot that, if successful, could see walkouts by nurses until Christmas.
We're going to speak to Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnson. Lucy, Pat Cullen, I think the head of the Royal College of Nursing, in my view, she's completely lost the plot because some weeks ago she recommended the nurses accept the 5% pay offer plus a lump sum. That's been accepted by 14 other unions. It was rejected in the strike in the ballot, 54%, I think, to 46% on a turnout of only 60%. Now she's saying she won't even go into the negotiation room unless there's a double-figure pay offer.
Yes, she has done a U-turn, but she says that's because the Royal College of Nursing rejected that offer. And she's also saying, and she said yesterday, that this double digits that she's asking for is a consolidated pay rise. So they're looking for that over 2 years, so not as dramatic as it first might seem. The other thing she's arguing is that the nurses, patients aren't dying because nurses are striking. She's flipped the narrative and said that the nurses are striking because patients are dying. And their Congress in Brighton right now, they're using that to describe how there's an increase in waits on trolleys, an increase in corridor care and unsafe staffing. However, at the same time, doctors, experts, medical experts are saying one more day of strike will make it's the final nail in the coffin for the health service. It's already got these 7.3 million people on the waiting list. There are people waiting. 2 in 5 cancer patients are waiting more than 2 months for treatment, which means they're increased risk of death. There are hundreds of thousands of heart disease deaths that are extra above the average. And the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics, in just 1 week, we had 22% extra excess deaths compared to the average, and most of that wasn't COVID. So something's going on. And when we had a national emergency, which was COVID, Rishi threw the checkbook at it. This health service is now in a national emergency, and the government doesn't seem to be taking it as seriously.
We were just talking, Lucy, about the number of people who are off long-term sick as well. 2.5 million people now not in the workplace. And part of that has to be to do with the fact that they are on endless waiting lists. Pat Cullen has a ticking time bomb of mood in this country until there is very little patience left for what she's trying to achieve.
I think so, although she's arguing that she's trying to improve the health service by increasing pay and therefore increasing the number of nurses coming into the service and staying in the service. At the same time, we're on such a knife edge in the health service, and if they increase pay for nurses, they'll have to do for other public sector workers. And there's a point where you have to say, well, what's affordable? We already spend 150 billion on the health service. That's about 10% of our tax. And we can't keep taxing people more and more when most of people haven't got much money anymore. You know, most people are struggling to survive as well. We're all struggling with the cost of living crisis, or most of us.
On strike, Lucy, possibly help waiting lists. How does it possibly improve patient care? It's simply ridiculous to suggest that's going to happen.
Well, of course, she's arguing that patients are not getting safe care. And to be fair to the nurses, they don't have a good pay scale necessarily to go up to. So there are nurses who are struggling and living on using food banks apparently. And so she's saying that without more nurses, I think she's arguing there's about 47,000 nurses short, and therefore she has to increase the pay in order to get more nurses into the system. But of course, it takes a long time for that to happen, and it takes a while to train a nurse. And because the NHS is, well, some people say it's now unsalvageable, that there is no hope for it, because we will never get back to waiting lists in a timely way, not for GP surgeries, not for cancer, not for heart disease, not to diabetes, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing all these excess deaths. In fact, that is, a report has shown that the latest figures available, just in 1 week, we had 2,540 extra deaths. That's more than the 5-year average. That's huge. If you think about sort of terrorist attack or a jumbo jet, it's enormous. So we are in a state where we need to do something drastic.
OK. Thank you, Lucy.
I mean, Steve Barclay needs to get round that table and not leave until it's sorted out, really.
Yeah,
I think that's the thing. It's no time for posturing and political tinkering. It's time to just sit down and not stop. Yeah. Okay.
Increasingly isolated. Thank you so much, Social and Health Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnston there. Right, time to go through some of the day's top stories. Joining us in the studio, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Good morning. And author and political commentator Tonya Buxton.
Can I just, on the back of that, Nigel, last week there was a really important story that Bev and I thought was really significant. The government talking about, actually, you don't need a degree to start training as a nurse.
Or a doctor.
Or a doctor. And who was quick to condemn it? The wretched health unions.
Yeah, I have to
and
say...
it's a positive thing. It would get people into nursing straight from A-levels.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are certain nursing jobs where you wouldn't need a degree.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about a doctor, though.
Yeah, that was the same. You could qualify to be a doctor, but you'd be on the job as well. You still have to pass your exams, you still have to attend some lectures, but you're in the workplace from the get-go.
Yeah.
Sounded really sensible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that it, you know...
But your mates in the unions were resisting it.
Yeah, it does feel to me like a doctor ought to go to medical school, you know, it's a 5-year course, there's a lot to learn, that's the way to do it. The idea of actually learning on the job sounds a bit risky to me.
But they do the exams as well.
Yeah, I think that the devil will be in the detail to some extent. Did you see that story last week, Tonya? What did you make of it?
As you said, the devil will be in the detail.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely, they should be learning hands-on, on the ground, doing the basic things, and actually doctors should do a lot of the things that nurses have to do so they have an understanding of it as well. And that's how they do it, because they come a bit too big for their boots sometimes when they've come through a medical degree, whereas if they're learning straight from A-levels on the ground, then they would get a much broader education of what it is to be a doctor, because it's not just about prescription, it's not just about treating, it's about how to be a doctor with people, because people need more than just the drugs you give them.
And nurses never used to have degrees.
Absolutely, they shouldn't have to. It's
they shouldn't be coming out of university with £70,000 of debt, starting as a nurse.
It's down to Blair, as we all know. He wanted everyone to have a degree and no one to have any qualifications.
Right, talking of universities, Tonya, this story caught your eye. Softening drugs policies at universities after pressure from student activist groups. What's going on?
OK, so what's happening is there are a lot of deaths from drugs at universities, and the kids are too scared to ring in and say, this person's fitting, this person's foaming at the mouth, this person's dying, because they're scared of being done for taking drugs.
Right.
So I have, quite a controversial idea when it comes to drugs. I think they should all be legalised, and I think there should be a lot more information about what each drug does. I mean, we now know that if you're smoking skunk and weed, you're 42% more likely if you're a young male to get bipolar disease or schizophrenia. I mean, it's really horrific. So legalise it and let them know what they're doing.
You're not arguing for legalising heroin?
Not heroin, no. Possibly. Actually, you know what? Again, whatever happens, there are certain people that are going to take these drugs, and wouldn't it be better if we knew where it was coming from, you get rid of the criminal element in it, and you can regulate it better? I mean, I'm a mother of 4, so I've had to really think this through. And I would rather, if, unfortunately, one of my children ended up being an addictive character and taking drugs, then I'd rather the drugs that they were taking, because you can't stop people from doing whatever they want, were ones that haven't been cut with, I don't know, asbestos or something like that. So I believe that we have to have more information on this. I think that drugs should be legalised. I'm really worried that when my son next year goes to university...
Where would you buy them? Where would you buy them? In the high street?
Again, a regulated place. You'd have to kind of go and buy them from somewhere regulated. I want to take the criminal element out of it, and I want to take... Because a lot of these drugs are on their own, if they were made properly, would just give the desired high effect. It's the thing that they're mixing them with that is making them so poisonous and deadly. So that would stop that from happening.
Where do you stand on this, Nigel?
Well, I find myself agreeing substantially with Tonya on this one.
Goodness.
I think it's the first time we've done so, actually, since we've been doing this.
Very worrying.
I think that the whole point about drugs is that when you make it part of the criminal justice system, it clearly doesn't work. You don't stop drugs coming in, and what it should be dealt with is a public health issue primarily. So what you need then is to work out the harms of drugs, and I think that this is where those old royal commissions would come in, and you look at the best way of redrawing drug laws. So you mentioned heroin, for instance. It may well be that heroin would be something that you would keep illegal, but not necessarily so. I think it's an evidence-based... You use an evidence-based system to find out what is the best way of helping young people.
So snorting cocaine at an Islington dinner party would be OK in Nigel's vision of Britain?
Well, it depends. That's what I mean about I think you need to take the evidence about people get addicted to cocaine. It's dangerous. So you need to...
Lethal. It's lethal.
Well, I mean, it's certainly dangerous. I mean,
people died from cocaine overdoses.
People can die from almost any sort of drugs. But what they're talking about at the university here is trying to reduce the harm that drugs cause. So what they're saying there is getting students to actually take drugs together. So if somebody suffers an adverse reaction, there's always someone there to call an ambulance, to have testing kits to make sure the drug is pure. Outside, we have needle exchange schemes to ensure that people don't get hepatitis from dirty needles. So those seem to be the priorities, and the police are actually quite keen themselves on at least decriminalising.
Can't we just discourage them from taking them in the first place?
But that's what I mean. There needs to be more information used to understand that. And I'm thinking, if it was decriminalised, all those woke Islington lot that think they're still young and cool. You know, those middle-aged idiots that are doing the cocaine at dinner parties. I have no time for them at all. Maybe they won't think it's so cool anymore if it's not criminal.
I'm really conflicted about this. And it's so interesting listening to you talk about it, because obviously I've got a teenage boy and I've got 2 teenage girls, you know, also to move into that sphere. One of the best deterrents for them is the fact that it is illegal. It is still, if you're a fairly well brought up child, like, you still don't want to do things that are going to get you in trouble with the police. I do think that is still a deterrent.
I have a different parenting view. You kind of know I have very strong lines of parenting with my children, and I'm very fair on some things and really firm on others. And I'm hoping that type of parenting is what's going to put them off taking drugs.
And it's a bit all over the place, isn't it? Because, I mean, alcohol and cigarettes, both of those can kill. That is perfectly legal.
But they'd never be... Would cigarettes ever have been legalised if we know now what we knew?
No, I don't think they would be. No, I think that's absolutely
Neither would
right.
alcohol, I don't think.
I don't think alcohol should be put in that, because alcohol does have medicinal qualities. You know, a glass of red wine is good for you. I won't have anything said about alcohol.
But it's interesting, from a political point of view, this notion of decriminalising at least drugs has not been on the political agenda for... Can you think of the last Prime Minister or the last government or the last cabinet that ever raised this?
Never going to happen.
Because they don't think there are any votes in it.
That's what I mean.
That's the point. But if you look around the world...
It used to be like quite a hardy perennial that would come up time and time again.
It kept coming up. But
hasn't for a long time
now.
No,
and I think that political leaders think, look, there's no votes in this, we won't go down that route, it's too much trouble. But if you look around the world, that increasingly, certainly with cannabis, that is being made legal in an awful lot of places, America, Netherlands, a whole load of other countries. So we are sort of moving generally globally to the idea that we have to have a different attitude to drugs if we're going to be able to control them.
But you see,
you could tax them,
when you say it's not a vote, but you see, when you say it's not a vote winner, we talk about knife crime and we say solve knife crime. Knife crime is often related to selling drugs. We say solve organised crime. That's related to drugs. Stop muggings on the streets. That's related to drugs. Maybe in the fullness of time, it does solve all those if drugs are legalised and monitored and taxed and sold. I can't really believe I'm saying this, but you know, I just think it's a conversation that I'd like to see more politicians have.
They're not going to do it. They won't do it.
They won't do it.
They won't do it.
No.
And I'm not sure they should.
Okay.
I'm not sure they should either. I'm really not sure, but it's something that I do think is really interesting. Do we have time to do another story very quickly? Nigel, Hugh Pill wishes he chose less inflammatory language in remarks last month. What's this about?
This is the Bank of England official who said that people should just accept being poor.
Oh, yes.
And of course it was the wrong language. Of course it was inflammatory. Nobody should accept being poor. You can see what he was trying to get at. Look, things are actually quite bad at the moment.
On his salary of 150,000.
Well, exactly. So it didn't actually help. But, I mean, for other people, things are quite bad. Money is very tight. I think he was trying to get the idea across that you've got to accept a certain amount of that. But the language he used was absolutely wrong. He's turned round and said, look, I wish I hadn't said it. He's absolutely right. He shouldn't have done it.
And his idiot boss, Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, on £650,000 a year, said we shouldn't be having pay rises.
Yeah.
He doesn't need one, does he?
Not really.
On that salary.
Not on that salary,
no. The Bank of England. Lost the plot.
Right, Tony Buxton, Nigel Nelson, thank you for now. You will be back with us in just a little while, but still to come, we're going to be looking into the growing food prices and what the Prime Minister is doing to fix it. This is To The Point on GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 11 o'clock on Tuesday, the 16th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
So a lot to get through this morning. The cost of putting a meal on the table has continued to soar. I'm sure you've noticed it. Supermarket bosses are in Downing Street for a farm to fork summit. Will it be just more words?
We're going to call it the walk of shame, actually, not farm to fork. Even baked beans are soaring in price. According to the Sun newspaper, the simple snack has gone up nearly 40%. How are you coping with the cost of the supermarket shop?
Yeah. And the tax man is coming, it seems, for more of us than ever. Nurses are amongst those caught in this 40p tax band now. It was originally, of course, intended for the rich. All of that and more on To The Point. Email, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first of all, here is the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Thank you. Here are the top stories at 1 minute past 11. The Prime Minister will tell European leaders the world's most vulnerable are paying the price for unlawful migration. Addressing the Council of Europe in Iceland this afternoon, he'll say the international system for policing human trafficking isn't working and that the UK isn't the only country being affected. That's as the government tries to implement the illegal migration bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords. The new law aims to tackle small boat crossings, sending asylum seekers back home or to a third country such as Rwanda. Ahead of his trip to Iceland, the Prime Minister's been addressing the Farm to Fork Summit. He's promising farmers a fairer price for their produce and pledging to get more of their products on supermarket shelves. The latest figures show meat, yoghurt and vegetables are just some of the items that have doubled in price compared to a year ago. Consumer group Which found food inflation remains at what it says are shockingly high levels. Gareth Wynne-Jones owns a farm in Wales. He told us cheap food comes at a cost.
If we're not backing British agriculture, what are we going to back? You know, build a better Britain on our bellies. We need a farming food revolution in this country. I've been telling you, we've been sleepwalking into food shortages for a long time. And, you know, when the shelves are empty, we can see what the cost is now. There wasn't tomatoes, there wasn't peppers. A lot of these government policies are trying to cut down on livestock. It's absolutely bonkers what they're doing. We have to get behind, you know, environmental schemes, don't get me wrong, but animals, livestock are part of that.
1 in 5 taxpayers could be paying higher rate income tax by 2027. Think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, says millions of middle earners, including some teachers, nurses and electricians, can expect to be paying 40% or more. Describing it as a seismic shift to the system, the IFS says the 6-year freeze to allowances and thresholds could become the single biggest tax-raising measure since 1979. Meanwhile, jobless figures have unexpectedly risen again. Unemployment rose to 3.9% in the first 3 months of the year, up from 3.8% in the previous quarter. Data from the Office for National Statistics also shows vacancies have fallen to the lowest level for 18 months, with the number of people in work slightly higher. Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth says the government needs to invest in training and reskilling.
I would argue that we need action now to help people who are trapped on benefits to move into work. It's why we've offered an into-work guarantee reform to a particular aspect of the benefit system. But we've also got to offer people proper training and help and reskilling to move into good, well-paid jobs, because a job should be able to provide for yourself, for your family, for you to build a home life. And too many jobs in the country are low-paid at the moment.
Vodafone has revealed plans to cut 11,000 jobs globally over the next 3 years. The company says the move is in response to its poor performance. The mobile phone giant reported a drop in full-year earnings and has forecast little to no growth over the current fiscal year. Staff at the UK's headquarters in Berkshire are also expected to be hit by the cuts as the firm works to simplify the business. A man's been arrested on suspicion of murder after 2 people were found dead at a house in Huddersfield. Officers were called to a property yesterday morning after paramedics found a man and a woman with multiple injuries. The streets cordoned off this morning with 5 police cars still at the scene. The suspect remains in police custody. The head of the Royal College of Nursing is expected to urge the Prime Minister to enter negotiations to end strike action. In a speech at the union's annual conference, Pat Cullen will tell members the government will be forced to act if nurses vote in favour of further industrial action. A postal ballot on new strikes will open next week. It's after the RCN turned down a pay offer of between 10.3% and 10.7% over 2 years, which the Prime Minister spokesperson says is a fair and generous offer. Ukraine's forces have shot down 18 Russian missiles overnight in a concentrated attack on the capital. Officials say drones, cruise and ballistic missiles were fired at Kyiv, describing it as an exceptionally intense air bombardment, which saw flashes and explosions across the skyline. It's the latest in the number of attacks targeting the capital this month. Up to 1 in 7 bus services across England could be cut if government funding isn't extended. The deal to keep services running expires at the end of June, and operators planning to cancel or change routes are required to give 6 weeks' notice, with pressure for a new agreement to be secured by Friday. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Bev and Andrew.
So the Prime Minister's summoned supermarket bosses to Downing Street, the Walk of Shame, we hope we will see them. He's talking obviously about food inflation, which is close to 20%.
Absolutely. You've been getting in touch a little bit about this morning, saying, Alan said, why can't the farmers set up their own supermarket? Robert says, I put a windfall tax on supermarkets, give all the proceeds to the farmers. Mike says, you're right to say that all supermarkets must have an area of British-grown produce. We do have the tractor sign on most produce already, but let's get some big signs up.
Absolutely. Well, let's get some more analysis from GB News Scotland reporter Tony Maguire. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning. So yes, I'm outside Lidl today in Kirkcaldy, just talking to really members of the public about how they feel, and the word that's on everyone's lips is just ridiculous. Now, we saw it a lot a few months ago during the SNP leadership race, where people weren't interested in independence, people weren't so interested in prioritising trans rights. It was all about the cost of living. Now, consumer researcher Which, they saw that bread and cheese, you know, basic essentials, they're up 80%. And certainly even food inflation growing a kind of an average of about 17.2 up to 19% in the last month. Now, I looked at the Office of National Statistics and had a little bit of fun in one of their tools earlier on, putting on a full English breakfast to see kind of what my savings, etc., would have been over the last couple of years. Now, things like cheese is up 40% as to what it would have been last year, bacon up 23%, granulated white sugar, you know, so if you enjoy your tea in a sweeter variety, then that's going to set you back as well. And all in all, £42.28 to put all of that together, and comparing to even last month, it was about £8.60 more than you would have spent going round the 10 items I selected for that fry-up. Now, certainly I had a chance to actually speak to a farmer last night on the phone, to Wendy McDougall at Muirhouse Farm, you know, and her opinion is actually that these prices now are pretty much where they should be in order for farms and farmers to make kind of even out profits. Now, she told me that rising food prices are only starting to get where they need to be to cover things like packaging and production. Input costs have certainly doubled for them as well, but certainly that's not helping people who are really struggling to put food on the table. Now, if when food prices get too high, well, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to take the hit and try and save money elsewhere, or you're going to buy less food. And sure enough, again, National Statistics, they said that around 48% of adults bought less food in the last month than in the previous month. Now, certainly that's a bit of a concern when, you know, we've got growing families, we've got a population crisis as well, where we're looking to try and grow the family unit. Now, making some strides towards that, we heard there about the Farm to Fork Summit, who helps if I say it right, and this morning Tesco, well, they announced about 30 of their essentials product are going to see a bit of a price cut. This follows on from not long ago where Sainsbury's and Tesco both took 5p off of a litre of milk, and I'm pretty sure that families up and down the country from John O'Groats to Land's End today will be hoping that this Farm to Fork Summit will save them more than a few pence a week.
Let's hope so. That's Tony Maguire, our reporter in Scotland. Thanks for being with us. Henry Hill's here. He's the Deputy Head of Conservative Home. Henry, doesn't matter what the Prime Minister does on immigration, very big in story, but the big political issue, the big issue for families is the cost of living crisis.
Yeah, absolutely, because it feeds into everything. It feeds into, one, at the very beginning, how many children do you actually think you can afford to have? When can you afford to have them? Then there's the childcare costs, which, you know, again, making people go to work, all of those difficult decisions, and then you get feeding and essentials and all the rest of it. So for millions of families who are in a very difficult situation, price stories like this can mean the difference between having some money left in the bank and none at all.
We've been banging on for ages on this programme. Liam Halligan's been talking about it. Why doesn't the Prime Minister get the supermarket bosses in? Because people are perplexed about why food inflation is so high when wholesale prices appear to be falling.
So the supermarket sector is very competitive. So normally, actually, supermarkets operate with quite a tight profit margin. They're not making huge amounts. Now, it is the case that prices in shops are often not as so often, entirely sensitive to drops in prices. You know, sometimes it takes supermarkets a little bit of time to bring that on, and the Prime Minister could perhaps do more. But we shouldn't fall for the idea that this is a problem caused by, you know, villains in boardrooms and profiteers. This is ultimately food is getting more expensive, wages are not rising. That's a toxic combination. And that's something that only the government, through policy interventions, can really fix.
What's the dilemma then for Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt in terms of the policies to fix this? Who are they trying to keep happy? Because it's certainly not the customers and the electorate.
Well, so all of this is really downstream of the fact that we have an economy where wages are sticky and growth is almost non-existent. And unfortunately, that's the case because an awful lot of the policies which are really sticking growth back are individually popular. You know, it's hard for people to connect an unpopular local housing development, an unpopular local railway line and stuff like that to an overall dynamic economy. And then, of course, there are other issues such as Suella Braverman touched on, you know, immigration. Yeah. If businesses can have a wide range of international labour to draw on, that's obviously going to make wages sticky because they have no incentive to increase wages to try and buy in new talent. So this is a huge fundamental problem with the entire structure of the British economy, and it filters out into all of these different stories. But it's not about finding a fix for supermarkets. It's about finding a fix for the fact that we are stuck in an entire economy with rising prices and sticky wages.
And we've got this National Conservative conference. Suella Braverman was there yesterday, the Home Secretary, talking about immigration. It seemed to me like a thinly veiled leadership campaign speech. Michael Gove is there today, the Living Up Secretary. He's going to be attacking Keir Starmer's plan to give EU citizens in this country a vote in the general election. Who's talking about the cost of living crisis?
Well, I think one of the things that national conservatism I'm not entirely sure what it is or that it knows what it is yet, no. But one of the problems with it, I think, is that it doesn't have a coherent economic theory. And in fairness, the Tories have for too long been too focused on economics. You know, from the Thatcherite days, they just talk about everything in terms of tax and economic policy. And I think the national conservatives are right that things like family policy and cultural issues, they do matter. Yeah. But it does mean that when you listen to all of these people talk, you're sort of like, oh, OK, well, this all sounds great, but how are people going to put food on the table and that kind of thing?
That's interesting, because we played a clip yesterday of Miriam Cates talking, and she was describing the low birth rates in terms of, and she was saying we shouldn't see it as a problem if that, from GDP point of view, we should see it as a social, cultural issue. That's a sort of slight different framing of that debate, isn't it?
It is, and there is definitely a case to be made that we need to shake off this kind of Treasury view, which is all just about charts.
Yeah.
Because, you know, fundamentally, it's perfectly possible for that line to be going up, but that not to be translating into good things for real people. House prices is a really obvious example. The Treasury, house prices juicing, season economy going up, that's great. But for lots of people who are then locked out of the housing market, can't, you know, buy their own flat, can't start families, that's a huge human cost.
Yeah.
But again, I think the danger is that you end up going, well, you don't worry about GDP and you don't worry about the economy, and ultimately we need to be a wealthier society. We need stronger growth. We need higher wages. And none of the social goods that the National Conservatives are often rightly concerned about will be really deliverable if that doesn't happen.
Is it an alternative to Rishi Sunak's strategy? Is that what's going on at this National Conservative Conference? Because we've got Gove there today, who is not, in my view, a contender to be the next leader of the Tory party. I don't think he'll even run for the leadership. But Braverman seemed that's exactly what she was doing.
I mean, Braverman, I think, was sort of rolling the pitch for a post-defeat leadership challenge. But I don't think that national conservatism and Rishi Sunak's strategy are really currently in contention, because Rishi Sunak's strategy is entirely just like get through the next year. Yeah. It's very technocratic. There's no ideological through line.
Yeah, what's the vision?
Yeah, precisely. And national conservatism is about what is conservatism, how do we kind of rethink it and redefine it going forward over the next 10 years. Those are just not doing the same thing. So there are lots of grounds for criticising Rishi Sunak, but it's not as if the NatCons have something to hand him that he could do over the next 12 months.
And what Gove is going to be attacking Starmer, and I think he's on fertile territory here.
Yeah, so Gove is attacking Starmer over leaked plans, which Labour have not confirmed, that they would extend the general election franchise to not just EU nationals, but maybe to all permanent residents. Yeah. And fundamentally, that would transform what this state is, because citizenship is what defines the people with whom the state has its primary covenant and responsibility, right? If you take the decision that anyone who is a permanent resident here can vote, Basically, what you're saying is actually the state is just a kind of geographic provider of public services, and you're delinking that national connection, which has been so essential to our traditional understanding of what most countries are.
One of the things that Swilla Braverman said yesterday, which of course is, when I say it's headlines, I mean it's literally the front page of the Express, was this very controversial statement about the fact that she said white people should not feel guilty about being concerned about unfettered immigration of different cultures. How will Rishi Sunak feel about a front page like that this morning?
I mean, it's making life difficult for Rishi because there is a huge tension. This is not Rishi's fault, or at least he inherited it. This goes all the way back to David Cameron. On the one hand, the Tories have these headline commitments about immigration. On the other hand, their actual policies are almost entirely, immigration dependent, right? And if you look at what the government has done over the last 12, 18 months with the points-based system, one of the great things about that is that you can actually see in quite fine detail what the government's actual immigration policy is. They have removed the requirement to advertise jobs in Britain first. They've lowered the amount of money you need to earn to get a visa under certain things. They've declared more and more things shortage occupations. Architects recently. Architect is now a shortage occupation. If you're an architecture firm, you can employ someone at 80% of the going rate, which is about £26,000. At the same time, the Architects Journal is running articles saying that people can't afford to be architects anymore because the wages are too low in the face of the cost of living crisis. But, we don't want those firms to have to raise their wages, so points-based immigration system,
bring them in from abroad.
Yep.
Cheaper. Yep. It's an inherent contradiction, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And I think that this is, I think, the problem for the Tories is that actually if you want to bring down net migration, which is a perfectly legitimate aim, you have to actually address the reasons we have it. And there are good reasons, right? We do need those taxpayers. Companies do want access to that labour. And if you really want to reduce that over the medium to long term, you need a fundamental rethink about how the British economy works.
But what we don't want is 700,000 people coming in or 1 million people coming in and no houses are being built to accommodate them, not enough schools for them, more pressure on the NHS. That's the problem.
That is a problem. But again,
a huge problem.
It is a huge problem. But the funny thing is, we'd have a massive housing shortage anyway, even if my immigration dropped to zero tomorrow, we're millions of houses short. But these problems all tie into each other because yes, on the economy side, you've got the Treasury going, right, we need workers, and you've got the Department for Education going, right, we want to bring in more students. And then we don't build anything because that bit of the government doesn't, is not delivering any policy. And that means higher house prices for everyone else.
OK, brilliant. Henry Hill from Conservative Home there, very insightful. Now, still to come, we're going to be discussing the renewal hearing into the case of Prince Harry versus the Home Office. You're with GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:21. You're with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner on GB News. This is To The Point.
So Prince Harry is set to face yet another legal battle today, this time against the Home Office over security provisions for him and his family when they're in the UK.
This comes us across the pond. The Duchess of Sussex, you know who she is, Meghan Markle, is going to be honoured with the 2023 Woman of Vision Award in New York later this evening.
So for more, let's speak to former Head of Royal Protection, Di Davis. Good morning, Di. So this is really interesting.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. This situation with Prince Harry and the security detail that he expects here, is he right to suggest that he should have royal security when he's in the UK, do you think?
Well, the truth is, as we saw for the coronation, he got 100% royal security. He even had a motorcycle escort, the SEG, back to the airport so he could catch his plane back. I mean, he gets it. It's cost you and I over £400,000 so far to argue the point that it's not his decision, much as he'd like it to be. It's made by a committee called RAVAC, Royalty and VIP, so on and so forth. They look at all the aspects. You should bear in mind that the vast majority of the British royal family no longer get 24-hour security. So he is no longer a working royal, and the risk assessment has decreed, rightly or wrongly, and I'm not aware of all the facets that would go into that decision now, that he's not going to get it. He will get it when he's on a royal mission. He got it because his dad was being made the king. What more does he want?
And, Di, this isn't about the king either. This is, as you say, it's a committee decides this. But if the king intervened privately behind the scenes to say, oh, come on, give him protection when he comes here, even on a private visit, would they listen?
Well, they would certainly listen to his point of view, as they did with the late Queen, because she, on one or two occasions, with one or two relatives who I won't mention, did make a personal request. And then you would look at that in the whole. As far as I'm aware, His Majesty has not intervened in this case, and I think it would be wrong, frankly, practically, for him to know, because he's not made fully aware. Perhaps he is these days, I don't know. But if there is a risk factor that somebody thought he should have it, or should have it while he pursues his own commercial interest, somebody should make that loud and clear. So far, they haven't. It's fair to say that he has his own protection team, both in the United States, and he has former members of royalty protection, as I understand it, who currently go with him. The truth is, if you know your history as I do, the number of times the royalty protection officers had to draw a gun is 0.001% on a scale. So let's get that in perspective too.
He's also a very wealthy man now, Di. Well, he was pretty wealthy before Netflix paid him millions and millions to abuse the royal family. So he can comfortably afford to pay for protection when he comes to the United Kingdom, which he does very rarely anyway.
Well, you're right. And again, he's chosen to live in LA, and I've worked with the LA authorities, the police there and the FBI. Trust me, he's 100 times more dangerous even than in London. So he's chosen a place to live where he does arguably require it, as most people do, because the gun crime there is horrendous. And yet he's chosen to live there. And that he comes back to this country where attacks on the royals fortunately are very rare. They do happen, and people do plot to do harm to our royals constantly. But so far, so good. So the case is pretty poor. If Princess Anne, who does more work than most of them, doesn't get it 24/7, why on earth should he, unless there's evidence, unless there's intelligence, that he should have it?
Di, we all wanted the coronation to go through without any major incident or threat to the royal family, which it did, actually. Having worked behind the scenes at those sorts of events, how much of a relief would that have been for the security services at the end of that weekend?
Oh, a huge amount of work, thousands of people hours. You're not allowed to say man hours these days, I don't think. But anyway, people hours went in.
You can on this
Went
programme.
into, actually, of course you can. Man hours went into it and female hours, of course they did. But yes, a huge relief, huge amount, months and months of planning, coordination, and I take my hat off to those currently doing the job at Scotland Yard. You know, the police get a lot of flack these days, as we've heard with one of your other contributors, you know, shooting the 11-year-old. You know, whatever they do, they can't be right. But it quite often it's on-the-spot decision-making. No matter how much planning you do, an event can happen where you have to react quickly and succinctly. And if you're carrying a gun, and I did on a number of occasions, it's a split-level decision where you pull that trigger if you're pointing it at somebody, trust me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
All right, that's Di Davis, the former head of Royal Protection. Thanks so much for joining us, Di. Now, today marks 80 years since the legendary 617 Squadron embarked on their mission to destroy German dams in the River Valley. Almost half their planes were shot down and 53 men were killed.
Tonight, a Lancaster bomber, the plane used in the attack, will fly over London and air bases in Lincolnshire in memory of those who took part. Our reporter, Will Hollis, has gone back in time to remember the raids.
Few Second World War stories hold the power of the Dambusters raid. The bravery of the men, the brilliance of the bouncing bomb, the absolute best of Britain and its allies. In May 1943, the men of 617 Squadron flew Lancaster bombers from RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire on a mission to destroy dams at the heart of Germany. Causing catastrophic damage to the Nazi war machine, Operation Chastise catapulted 617 to international fame, particularly Wing Commander Guy Gibson, who was just 24.
Wing Commander Guy Gibson, on whom the Queen bestowed the Victoria Cross.
He famously said the squadron will either make history or be completely wiped out. Immortalised in the 1950s film, 617's exploits are a tale that Brits never tire of telling. But the men in the story are all gone. The last surviving raider, Johnny Johnson, died in December. Here he is speaking in 2018.
Always the uppermost thing in my mind was the dams raid. That had to be the outstanding part of the whole of my career.
Inventor Barnes Wallis, who created the bouncing bomb, is celebrated as one of the war's greatest minds. A prototype is displayed at the Petwood Hotel in Woodhall Spa. It became 617's home after the dams raid.
This is a beautiful picture of a snowball fight between 617 and 627 squadrons.
Edward Mear is the hotel's historian.
Coming as they did from ordinary, sometimes terraced homes in industrial cities. And to come here, it was already like a palace to them. And they really did feel as though they'd, and I quote them, died and gone to heaven. But of course, the following evening, that's probably what a lot of them did.
53 men died in the raid. They're remembered at the 617 memorials in Woodhall High Street. Chris is part of the Squadron Association. His dad, John, joined 617 after the raid, flying missions on D-Day and Fortress Europe.
He tended to keep very quiet with the family, but he was involved in squadron reunions.
Chris says his dad spoke highly of the Dambuster men.
He was in awe of them. They were doing something which had never been done before in creating that sort of attack.
To mark the 80th anniversary, the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight will fly a Lancaster above wartime bases, including the historic Dambusters' home, Scampton. Recently, a government plan to house up to 2,000 asylum seekers at the old base has been met with backlash from locals and politicians. Back at the memorial, Chris says we must never forget what the men of 617 did in the raids.
I think it's important that we remember this anniversary and anniversaries to come because of the bravery of these men.
617 still flies in the Air Force. The pilots inside the cockpits are different, but the courage inspired by the Dambusters is still there.
They are sure to be remembered in all histories of the war. They did a magnificent job.
Will Hollis, GB News in Lincolnshire.
What a lovely film. Where would we have been without the Dambusters? Amazing. And extraordinary that Lancaster is flying 80 years on, still flying.
Tonight.
And there was a really interesting letter in the Times the other day. One of the results of the Dambusters was Hitler had to move engineers from France where they were shoring up defences to prop up the dams, which meant the defences in France, northern France, weren't as good as they should have been, which was very helpful for the invasion. So double whammy.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Lovely. Right, still to come. Britain's strictest head teacher. She's brilliant. I love her. She's got some very harsh words for schools. That's after your morning's news with Tamsin Roberts.
Thanks, Bev. Here are the headlines at 11:31. The Prime Minister will tell European leaders the world's most vulnerable are paying the price for unlawful migration. Addressing the Council of Europe in Iceland this afternoon, he'll say the international system for policing human trafficking isn't working and that the UK isn't the only country being affected. That's as the government tries to implement the illegal migration bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords. Well, ahead of his trip to Iceland, the Prime Minister's been addressing the Farm to Fork Summit at Downing Street. He's promising farmers a fairer price for their produce and pledging to get more of their products on supermarket shelves. The latest figures show meat, yoghurt and vegetables are some of the items that have doubled in price compared to a year ago. Consumer group Which found food inflation remains at what it's saying shockingly high levels. Gareth Wynne-Jones owns a farm in Wales. He told us cheap food comes at a cost. 1 in 5 taxpayers could be paying higher rate income tax by 2027. Think tank the Institute for Fiscal Studies says millions of middle earners, including some teachers, nurses and electricians, can expect to be paying 40% or more, describing it as a seismic shift to the system. The IFS says the 6-year freeze to allowances and thresholds could become the single biggest tax-raising measure since 1979. Meanwhile, jobless figures are unexpectedly high, with unemployment rising to 3.9% in the first 3 months of the year, up from 3.8% in the previous quarter. Data from the Office for National Statistics also shows vacancies have fallen to the lowest level for 18 months. TV, online, DAB plus radio and tune in. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2532 and €1.1506 euros. The price of gold is £1,603 and 91 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,779 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain.
our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:37. You're with To The Point on GB News. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have seen that footage during the news of people arriving at Downing Street. This is for the Farm to Fork summit. That, of course, is Caleb Cooper and cheerful Charlie Island. You might recognise them from Clarkson's Farm. I think that is actually really good news that they have got somebody in there that does know what they're talking about. No Jeremy Clarkson, interestingly. I don't think he's a massive fan,
is he? If you've read his column, he's no fan of Rishi Sunak. But what we also want to see is the supermarket bosses in there, because they're the ones who've got to justify the charges they're making.
Yeah.
Not least because we've seen that they're ripping people off over the cost of diesel.
So Charlie and Caleb are there. Right, now, we had this national conservatism conference yesterday and also today. One of the people speaking, you might know from Channel 4's Britain's Strictest Head Mistress is the name of the series, Catherine Burble-Singh. This is what she said at the lectern yesterday.
So why do I need to throw all of you into detention? Because you haven't been paying enough attention to the fact that our nation's culture is not only created in our schools, but that it is our children who are leading the development of that culture in our schools. Adult authority is long gone. So here I am, ringing the alarm. In 20 years, many of us will be retired or sadly dead. And the children in our schools will be in important and influential positions in our institutions. As G.K. Chesterton said, the true soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him. Well, I'm asking, how much do you love your country? How much do you love the values that you claim to defend? Do you love them enough to tweet under your own name? Do you love them enough to change your child's school to one that's less woke and ignore the impact on your social status? Do you love them enough to do more than simply chat to your friends who already agree with you at dinner parties? For heaven's sake, man, stand up and be counted. As Russell Crowe says in the film Gladiator, a clip I regularly play for my staff, hold the line, stay with me. What we do in life echoes in eternity. Will your life echo hollow with cowardly hypocrisy, or will it echo with courage, valiance, and honour? The choice is yours. Strength and honour be with you all. Now get yourselves to detention.
She's brilliant, isn't she?
Well,
round of applause.
And what a refreshing to hear that, rather from all the garbage we get from the
Actually makes me emotional
the
listening to
union
that.
leaders who just seem to want to be on strike the whole
Does
time.
it make you emotional, Tanya?
It really does. And having worked
as a primary school teacher for 8 years, I know that there are very few head teachers like her.
Yeah.
She is a complete diamond. She's the type of person that would make me want to go back to teaching, because teaching has become so alien to me now. She's right. It's true. They're brainwashing our children. Okay, the teaching that our children are getting in schools at the moment is brainwashing from a young age, from primary ages. They're being told that a woman isn't a woman, and that we're all about to die because of climate. Don't you understand? Instilling this fear, this madness, this mental health illness, as far as I'm concerned, into our children. And she stood up for them there.
She's fearless, Nigel, and you never see that.
No, I mean, I think she's terribly impressive. It's just when you see something like that I don't quite know what she's getting at.
Really?
Really?
Yeah, on the basis that when she's talking about if you think your school is woke, take your children out of it, isn't the most important thing that your child is happy at school and getting a good education, not about whether or not it might be a bit woke or something like that?
Well, that's one clip of the whole speech, and what she's really representing is she's saying if you want to stop this change that you may not like, you're going to have to be brave about it, because the forces of change are so strong in terms of a little bit about the gender politics, but just about the general permissiveness that the children are in charge in the classroom, and the teachers have to feel empowered to, like she says, to hold the line, to be strong, to be disciplined with children. That's what I think she's partly getting.
But that's about good teaching, isn't it? I mean, we all remember our best teachers at school, the ones that actually inspired us.
They'd all get sacked now, Nigel. They'd all get sacked now. They'd all get because you're too firm, affecting someone's mental health, not speaking like that. I mean,
boundaries.
There's no boundaries at all in school. The manners have gone. The discipline has gone. I worked in education. We would all get sacked now. If your teachers kept that firm line now, they couldn't have it.
Often good teachers shouted at us.
Yes.
They wouldn't be allowed to now, would they?
No, not allowed to. You're not to point out someone that's being lazy. You're just being lazy. I mean, oh gosh, the amount of times I had teachers saying to me, you know, you are just lazy. You are a lazy child. You better get on with it. And
were they right?
Absolutely right. I was really lazy, and that's what I need. I couldn't say that now.
Yeah.
Nigel, you're looking bemused. Do you
I
know
am
what's happening in schools?
I mean, as far as I can gather, I mean, I haven't worked in schools, but I do know an awful lot of teachers, and I can still pick out the ones who are the good ones, the inspirational ones, the ones who are going to work with the kids. And when you talk to kids, they actually set out one teacher. It's not about shouting at kids or anything like that. It's actually about being. It's an instinctive thing. You are a good teacher or you're not. And I'm not sure that particularly has changed over the years.
I think what has changed over the years is the lack of leadership, really strong leadership within schools, because teachers now are often worried about upsetting the parents as much as upsetting the children. I think hasn't there been a shift in that, you know, when we were younger...
You're not taking him with you. He's just not there. He's just not with you.
I think, well, when we were younger, I think if a child misbehaved, the parent would come in and say to the teacher, what have they done? Tell me. Now, if a child misbehaves, the parents go in and say to the teacher, what have you done to my child?
I had exactly that experience.
Yeah, I mean...
I had exactly that experience.
And that's what I think Catherine Birbalsingh is talking about.
I had exactly that experience. So when I was a child, I would be so fearful of them telling my mother. Because my mother would wreak much harsher punishment than the school ever could on me. When I told off certain children, I had complaints about me that I was picking on poor Billy or whatever, you know, because I was being firm, because Billy was a rude little thing. And, you know, I constantly had to tell him off and tell him to be polite and watch his manners, or send him out of the class, whatever. And I got... the parents would come in. It happened on more than one occasion. The parents would come in and say, oh, they're picking on my boy. Their boy was vile.
Yeah.
Anyway...
She, of course, worked with Michael Gove when he was Education Secretary. And he was a big fan when he was Education, and I think he was a good Education Secretary. I think it was sad that he was booted out of the job because David Cameron was worried. The focus groups thought he was unpopular. But she couldn't stand working with government because nothing got done.
And has recently left the committee that she was actually working with government on.
Which is so sad, really.
It is. Nigel, what's this story? Talking of Michael Gove, last night telling Keir Starmer to answer claims that he wants to undermine the Brexit by granting the EU citizens the vote. This is Andrew's...
16-year-olds.
And 16-year-olds.
Well, I mean, the question really comes down to, is this vote rigging or not? There's been a big row this week about vote rigging. So we've got Keir Starmer on one hand, he is talking about, not saying he'll do it, but having a look at whether or not EU citizens should have the right to vote in general elections. They're allowed to vote in local elections at the moment. Plus the idea of whether 16-year-olds should get the vote. They're allowed it in Scotland and Wales, but not in England. And now we've also got Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, well, hang on, but the Tories were gerrymandering the vote as well by bringing in voter ID. Voter ID was never necessary. There is very little voter fraud or personation in voter fraud.
Why do the left get so upset about this? The whole of Europe has voter ID. The whole of Europe.
Yeah,
We've had it in Northern Ireland for 25 years.
But there was no need for it. That what little voter fraud there was wasn't actually making any difference to elections. And the one thing they didn't tackle, where voter fraud actually could be quite serious, is in postal voting. So it's not one person turning up to the polling station trying to pretend to be somebody else. It's somebody collecting a whole load of sheets for postal votes and sending those in. It could actually influence an election.
But what about the fact Starmer wants to allow EU citizens to have a vote in a general election? That doesn't happen in any European Union country.
No, it doesn't.
At all.
No.
So why is he trying to do it? Because he thinks they'll all vote Labour.
Well, I mean, I'm sure at the back of his mind is actually whether these people will be Labour voters or not.
Of course, it's not the back of his mind.
The question comes down to whether or not somebody who is invested in this country should then have a say in it. And if EU citizens can vote in local elections and stand in local elections, they can do that too. Shouldn't we be looking at the whole electoral system and saying, is it not time to actually get these odd situations in different countries absolutely regulated? Now, I'm not saying that he'll do it. I'm not saying that necessarily once you look at it, it'll be as clever an idea as he thinks it is. And there is a bill going through Parliament which would stop any EU citizen from voting who came here after Brexit. But it is something worth looking at.
And, of course, that's what the suspicion.
Of course.
They will then... if all these people vote Labour, he can then overturn Brexit.
Yeah, I mean,
we know he wants to get rid of it.
Yeah, I do think that's Tory propaganda.
Well, I believe it.
No,
I believe it.
I completely believe it as well. And this whole thing about wanting 16-year-olds to be able to have the vote, and the reason is because 16-year-olds are stupid. And I remember what I was like. I was telling the story earlier. So my father, an immigrant, came over to this country, worked harder than anyone imaginable. I mean, his work ethic was off the scale. I went off to college and to university, and I came back, completely brainwashed by those about me. And my dad was a self-made man, and I said to him, "Dad, we're rich. I think you should think about redistributing your wealth to the poorer people." His answer was, "And this, my darling, is why you don't educate girls." But my point is that you are brainwashed. You have all these ideals when you're young and stupid, and you don't actually have to fend for yourself and pay bills and do anything. So of course he wants the 16-year-olds to have it.
They're not allowed to even have a credit card at the age of 16.
No, but they're allowed
they can't get married.
But they're allowed to be a company director. And so, I mean, one of the most impressive things I heard from a young woman at speaking at the Youth Parliament was that she was allowed to marry her MP, have children with her MP, but she couldn't vote for her MP. The only question that comes down with 16...
What, at 16?
Yeah.
You'd have to get permission from her parents.
You'd have to get permission, but you could do it. You could actually legally do it. So the idea of... And, of course, they've got the vote in Wales and Scotland. So, again, we seem to be the outlier here in England. The only question about votes at 16 is where that goes next about when is a child an adult.
Yes.
And I think that is a much more serious kind of issue because, for instance, how would you feel about a 16-year-old being put in an adult prison?
Yeah. And Keir Starmer said that you can't be an adult till you're 18 when it came to gender things. So, but he thinks it's OK to vote. He's just so full of hypocrisy. It's nauseating.
Yeah, and you can be in the army, but you can't shoot a gun in anger.
Not any longer, no, absolutely. And then you get the situation that with 16-year-olds who have the vote in Scotland and Wales, they can't then buy a drink. And again, you've got all these anomalies that would actually need to be worked out.
Because they're not deemed responsible enough to cope with alcohol.
Well, then this is the point, isn't it? That it's something else that needs to be looked at in the round, rather than simply saying, oh, well, that group should have the vote, this group should have the vote. Actually, the implications of giving somebody the vote, what it actually means.
Starmer thinks they'll all vote Labour, but of course...
But he's right, because look what's happened in Scotland and Wales. They're a mess, aren't they? Because they've got kids voting them in.
Tonya, let's move on to this story about Japan. This is seeing a proliferation of seminars and workshops on how to smile. Why is that?
This breaks my heart.
Me too.
This breaks my heart because, you know, Japan has only just got rid of its mask mandates. Can we just say, once again, masks don't work when it comes to an airborne virus. They are just polluting our seas. They are a load of rubbish. But Japan's finally woken up to that and taken these masks away. And people have forgotten how to smile at each other.
Terrible.
Kids, I mean, and these are adults going back to smile classes. This 70-year-old man said that, you know, he'd forgotten how to smile and to kind of have that relationship with another person just on facially. But can you imagine what it's done to children, to young developing babies and children having to wear masks? I mean, it always amazed me when I see these mothers pushing their babies with masks on outside.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you doing? What's your child seeing?
This is one of the first sort of concrete effects that we're seeing, I think. Nigel. I mean, we've seen it in child development. We've seen it anecdotally with teachers saying that you've got children starting at primary school who were born in lockdowns and didn't have that human interaction and therefore don't have the same speech skills. But the idea that a whole country is sad. They're not smiling because they've just... I mean, Asian countries were of course wearing masks quite routinely even before the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I was going to say that whenever I've seen Japanese tourists in London, and they're now coming over about now, they all look pretty cheery to me, at least the ones who aren't wearing masks, because some still do. I do wonder also how this kind of therapy works. I mean, what do? Do you tell people jokes, or do you show them a cute puppy or something like that to make them smile?
I think you just smile, you know, into the mirror. Because, you know, Nigel, that if you're feeling really low and you fake a smile to yourself, just to yourself, this is psychological therapy here, you just smile and smile and smile, somewhere along the line your subconscious will get conned and you'll feel better.
Fine. Well, I shall smile an awful lot today, then.
You do always smile, actually, Nigel.
You're very smiley.
Yeah, Nigel's very smiley.
I think he is, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Which one do we want to do? We've got one last story we can do. What about, Nigel, the supermarket bosses, about the petrol and diesel prices ripping off the customers?
Yes, and unfortunately the watchdog, the Competition Markets Authority, is now going to look into this and is calling supermarkets before them and saying, why is petrol, which is going down in price, 5p a litre more on their forecourts than it should be, on the basis they're making more profit than they did in 2019. Why is diesel on garage forecourts 20p more a litre than it should be, when diesel is actually cheaper than petrol? So it's absolutely right they're doing this, and if we are being ripped off, it's time it stopped.
Yeah, and supermarkets used to be where you went for your cheap fuel.
Well, a supermarket like Asda, for example, were the ones at the barometer that we used to go to. Let's go to find an Asda supermarket to go and get our petrol from there. But they have been now bought out by a petroleum company, a petrol-making company. And so that's why their prices are so high. So there seems to be this very dodgy monopoly going on there, and they have to be seen to. They have to be told off.
And Asda was the company that sold petrol at a loss.
That's right.
To get people into the supermarket. And now they're at the other end of the scale. It's really appalling.
Yeah.
People are just they are being ripped off.
Well, the same thing the banks are doing with interest rates. Interest rates are going up. They're not passing on
into savers
to the savers, which is the other half of what the Bank of England is meant to be doing.
Well, hopefully Rishi Sunak will be discussing this with the supermarket bosses in the summit this morning.
Yeah.
Let's hope so. Well, when we hear later this week, maybe tomorrow even, what's come out of that summit, we will, of course, talk about that. Nigel Nelson, lovely to see you. Tonya Buxton, as always, what a joy.
Smiling, both
and
of them,
the best accent impression we've had in a very long time. Right, we've come to the end of the show this morning. It has flown by. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. This is The Point with Andrew and Bev. We'll be back tomorrow at 9:30.
See you then.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather from the Met Office for GB News. Another fairly chilly day today. A few showers around across the north, but many places will be dry and bright with some May sunshine, all thanks to this large area of high pressure. It's slowly trying to push in from the west. Around the top of it, though, we've got reasonably cool air drifting southwards and a few scattered showers. Quite a bit of cloud across central Scotland through lunchtime, spreading a few showers through the central belt into southern Scotland, and eventually through the afternoon, a few of those showers cropping up over northern England, but pretty well scattered. Some sunny spells in between, brightening up already over northern Scotland, and it's mostly fine in the south, with a mixture of cloud and sunshine, and temperatures getting up to 18, 19, perhaps even up to 20 Celsius, but feeling cooler. That northerly wind over the Northern Isles, temperatures struggling here. Still a few of those showers around for much of the evening over southeast Scotland and northeast England, maybe even the odd heavy one, but they do fade away, should be gone by midnight, and then most places again looking dry with a bit more cloud in the east, temperatures holding up a little here, but generally quite a chilly night again, well down into single figures, particularly in the countryside. Pockets of frost again possible through some sheltered glens across Scotland. Again, most places dry and bright on Wednesday. The cloud will thicken through the day with some rain later on getting into the Western Isles. Again, 1 or 2 showers during the day, most likely in the morning actually, late morning over parts of eastern England, tending to fizzle out through the afternoon. So again, most places dry for much of the day with temperatures around about average for the time of year after that coolish start. A bit more rain just trickling in there to northern Scotland through Wednesday evening, but the central belt and areas south likely to stay dry and fine and largely clear, leading into another fine day by and large on Thursday. Later on, some showery rain coming into the northwest, but for much of this week, most places dry with some sunny spells, but never particularly warm.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Tuesday lunchtime, getting difficult to swallow. The rampant food inflation that's doubled the cost of meat, cheese and vegetables in the past year. Well, as the Prime Minister holds a food summit at Downing Street, the Consumers Association calls on Rishi Sunak to challenge the supermarkets. And millions of us now face paying the higher rate of tax, including nurses, fitters, electricians. Why is the 40% tax ban no longer the preserve of the rich? And could Europe help the UK to tackle illegal immigration? Rishi Sunak heading to Iceland to appeal to a top-level summit of European leaders to clamp down on the criminal gangs. Also coming up, we'll reflect on the historic Lancaster bomber taking to the skies once more to mark the 80th anniversary of the Dambuster raids. We'll be telling you where you can join that special flypast tonight. All that to come, but first, the latest headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 12 o'clock. The Prime Minister will tell European leaders the world's most vulnerable are paying the price for unlawful migration. Addressing the Council of Europe in Iceland this afternoon, he'll say the international system for policing human trafficking isn't working and that the UK isn't the only country being affected. That's as the government tries to implement the illegal migration bill, which is currently going through the House of Lords. The new law aims to tackle small boat crossings, sending asylum seekers back home or to a third country such as Rwanda. Well, ahead of his trip to Iceland, the Prime Minister has been addressing the Farm to Fork summit at Downing Street. He's promising farmers a fairer price for their produce and pledging to get more of their products on supermarket shelves. The latest figures show meat, yoghurt and vegetables are just some of the items that have doubled in price to a year ago. Consumer group Which found food inflation remains at what it says are shockingly high levels.
If we're not backing British agriculture, what are we going to back? You know, build a better Britain on our bellies. We need a farming food revolution in this country. I've been telling you, we've been sleepwalking into food shortages for a long time. And, you know, when the shelves are empty, we can see what the cost is now. There wasn't tomatoes, there wasn't peppers. A lot of these government policies are trying to cut down on livestock. It's absolutely bonkers what they're doing. Have to get behind, you know, environmental schemes, don't get me wrong, but animals, livestock are part of that.
That was farmer Gareth Wynne-Jones speaking to us earlier. Now, 1 in 5 taxpayers could be paying higher rate income tax by 2027. Think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, says millions of middle earners, including some teachers, nurses and electricians, can expect to be paying 40% or more. Describing it as a seismic shift to the system, the IFS says the 6-year freeze to allowances and thresholds could become the single biggest tax-raising measure since 1979. Meanwhile, jobless figures have unexpectedly risen again. Unemployment rose to 3.9% in the first 3 months of the year, up from 3.8% in the previous quarter. Data from the Office for National Statistics also shows vacancies have fallen to the lowest level for 18 months, with the number of people in work slightly higher. Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Jonathan Ashworth says the government needs to invest in training and reskilling.
I would argue that we need action now to help people who are trapped on benefits to move into work. It's why we've offered an into-work guarantee reform to a particular aspect of the benefit system. But we've also got to offer people proper training and help and reskilling to move into good, well-paid jobs, because a job should be able to provide for yourself, for your family, for you to build a home life. And too many jobs in the country are low-paid at the moment.
Vodafone has revealed plans to cut 11,000 jobs globally over the next 3 years. The company says the move is in response to its poor performance. The mobile phone giant reported a drop in full-year earnings and has forecast little to no growth over the current fiscal year. Staff at the UK's headquarters in Berkshire are also expected to be hit by the cuts as the firm works to simplify the business. A man's been arrested on suspicion of murder after 2 people were found dead at a house in Huddersfield. Officers were called to a property yesterday morning after paramedics discovered a man and a woman with multiple injuries. The streets cordoned off this morning and the suspect is still being questioned by West Yorkshire Police. Greggs Bakery has revealed its sales have surged by nearly a fifth over the past year. The bakery chain says its food is attractive to customers looking for a cheaper alternative amid the rising cost of living. Sales grew by 17% over the past 12 months compared to the previous year. It says they're tapping into a new market with a wider variety of hot foods, which are high in demand, as well as newer vegan products. The head of the Royal College of Nursing is urging the Prime Minister to enter negotiations to end strike action. Addressing the union's annual conference, Pat Cullen said the government will be forced to act if nurses vote in favour of further industrial action. A postal ballot on new strikes will open next week. It's after the RCN turned down a 5% pay rise this year and a one-off payment for last year, which Number 10 says is effectively an increase of more than 10% over 2 years. Ukraine's forces have shot down 18 Russian missiles overnight in a concentrated attack on the capital. Officials say drones, cruise and ballistic missiles were fired at Kyiv, describing it as an exceptionally intense air bombardment, which saw flashes and explosions across the skyline. It's the latest in a number of attacks targeting the capital this month. Up to 1 in 7 bus services across England could be cut if government funding isn't extended. The deal to keep services running expires at the end of June, and operators planning to cancel or change routes are required to give 6 weeks' notice, with pressure for a new agreement to be secured by Friday. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Tamsin, thank you very much indeed. So, the Prime Minister being urged by the Consumers Association, no less, to take Britain's supermarkets to task after the latest food inflation figures show that the cost of meat, cheese, vegetables all doubling in the past year. Well, a special food summit called Farm to Fork, summit being held at Downing Street, as Which magazine says that food inflation still at shockingly high levels. Just to tell you that one of the people attending